On the importance of text analysis for stock price prediction is a paper as a result of a collaboration between Stanford University, University of Arizona, and Google. Um, so in the US, when there are important events such as when the CEO of a company changes, as it is suggested in this paper, a company is required to file several forms such as 8K and 10K forms. This paper is focusing on text analysis in short for stock price prediction while focusing on these documents, mainly the 8K documents. And the objective is to predict the changes in the price direction at certain milestones. And that change is something like whether or not the price has increased over 1%, decreased to less than decreased more than 1%, or stayed almost the same as the previously known value. Well, the main input in this paper is the 8K forms, which are forms that are filed by publicly listed US companies. The outputs are labels up, down, stay, which are going to be predicted within a short-term period, namely a few days or like one day after the financial related events reported by these forms. These outputs are associated with the price changes in percentage, and over 1% is up, less than 1% is down, and this area in between is a stay. This is very similar to the other approaches in the literature. The only difference is that uh, one of the common practices is to do a binary prediction, meaning whether or not the price goes up or goes down. This paper also uses the stay label, which is going to uh, probably make it a little bit more challenging and incorporate small changes as a neutral change and assign a stay label to them. One thing to note that is that this paper claims that the presented methodology is designed from the standpoint of an individual investor without access to real-time trading tools. So it is assumed that intraday information on the stock prices is not available and not necessary for the objective of this work. Another important thing is that the corpus that they have gathered is available in this link. So here they talk about the basically the criteria that they had for gathering the data. So they have been using the Edgar uh, framework. Um, and one thing to mention is that there is a good Python API and wrapper for this, which I think is official. And you could use it to get the 8K financial report files, get the company IDs, and things like that. So they got the 8K reports and they removed all the HTML tags such as P and TD, and they also removed any tabular data with numerical values. So this is an example of what they would end up with, which is a unstructured text in an 8K form of a company. The train test split that they had was 2012 to 2012, with the last 2 years being test, everything else for training. And yep. To go back to 8K reports, they have important information such as bankruptcies, layoffs, election of a director, changing credits. So this part and Table 1 explain the important things that can be found in a 8K form filed by a publicly listed US company. So this is the more complete list of things you can find in an 8K form. Then we have the details and the statistics of the dataset. So this is again important to know. So maybe take a moment to take a look at it. It appears that the density of the content in the corpus kind of is increasing. So even though we have like the last 2 years for test in this paper, it is pretty clear that kind of the sizes are not that far apart. And they mentioned that they have used basically time split in order to separate the test and train, which leads into a more robust way of evaluating the frameworks. One thing to note about them constructing the labels is that they have been using the S&P 500 index or the stock index GSPC, which is a measure of the general situation in the market. And so when they have a change in the price, they also subtract the change in the S&P 500 index from that change, so that the limit of 1% based label assignment is after this normalization is performed. Here is a better overview of what they have been doing. So they're using these features here, and some of these features are not necessarily natural language processing related. Like for example, they have gathered the earnings surprise data from Yahoo website, basically downloaded from Yahoo website, sorry, and they have other information included too. So they are using unigram features for processing these textual information, and then they are using non-negative matrix factorization as a way of representation for these data, which is a common practice in this kind of approaches and approaches like processing electronic health records and things as such. In their experimental setup, they are using a random forest classifier using 2000 trees and tuning the hyperparameters based on this area. And they compare the system against two baselines. One of the baselines that they choose is a deterministic system that makes the up prediction when the actual earnings is better than the expected earnings. And they also compare against a random forest classifier that uses all of the 21 proposed financial features described above, but no linguistic features. So this is sort of an ablation study indicating the importance of the linguistic features that come from the 8K forms used in this paper. They find out that this earning surprise feature is very important, so that's one of the findings. In the results for the proposed models, they have different accuracies related here. Random guess is the lowest, majority class, which basically is a dummy classifier, is afterwards. And then finally the ensemble model is the model that works best. Going over 1 day gap between the predictions, they come up with like making examples like making a prediction based on the closing value on October 29th and the open value on October 31st and things as such. This curve here indicates that the importance of linguistic features kind of is decreasing as you are proceeding to predicting values for milestones further in the future. We can see that there's a huge gap for the first day, and then as you go forward, this gap starts closing up, and we can see that even though the unigram features are still, adding value, the value that is being added is kind of decreasing, assuming that we have the accuracy as a metric that we want to measure the performance of the system with. This basically concludes this paper. There are some limitations, and this paper makes sure that the audience understands that the actual goal of this paper was to figure out whether or not linguistic features, which in fact they're focusing on linguistic features coming from 8K forms, add anything to the predictive value. But obviously there are limitations. There are a lot of things that this work doesn't consider. But in conclusion, it shows that processing financial forms such as 8K documents is actually very important in making predictions regarding short-term changes in response to a financial event.